Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. I used to believe love was about patience. That was the word I clung to when Megan sighed loudly in the middle of my sentences, when she corrected me in front of her friends like I was a child, when she spoke about my role in our family as if it were something temporary, an accident waiting to be corrected. I told myself she was under pressure, that she carried the burden of being the breadwinner while I stayed home with our daughter. I excused the sharp looks, the dismissive tone, the small but deliberate ways she chipped away at my confidence. But love isn't supposed to make you feel like an inconvenience. It was subtle at first. The way she'd interrupt me at dinners, talking over me like I wasn't even there. The way she'd laugh when I made a suggestion, as if my opinions were amusing but never worth considering. And the way she'd frame it later. I was just joking, Jake. You're too sensitive. One evening, I caught her rolling her eyes when I told a story at a friend's barbecue. I faltered, my words sticking in my throat as I watched her shake her head slightly, giving that look to the group. The kind that said, "Here we go again." I let it slide, like I always did. But the moment that broke me came at her parents' anniversary dinner, a lavish event where Megan always played the role of the perfect daughter. The room was filled with executives, lawyers, and high-power professionals, people she respected, people she wanted to impress. Halfway through the evening, her father raised a glass, praising Megan's success, her latest consulting project in London. The applause was warm, the admiration clear. Then her mother turned to me, smiling politely. "And how's life treating you, Jake? How's the housework?" A chuckle rippled through the table. Megan smirked. "Oh, he's a real expert in laundry cycles now. Just last week, he spent hours researching the best way to fold a fitted sheet." Laughter, not the kind that comes from a harmless joke, but the kind that stings. The kind that tells you you're the only one who doesn't find it funny. I gripped my fork, my knuckles white. I glanced at Megan, waiting for a wink, some sign that she didn't mean it. But she wasn't even looking at me. She was basking in the laughter, in the attention, in the moment she had created at my expense. A familiar feeling crawled up my spine. Helplessness. I forced a smile, pushing a bite of food into my mouth to keep from speaking. What was I supposed to say? That I had spent the last 4 years keeping our family together while she climbed the corporate ladder? That our daughter turned to me first for everything? That I had sacrificed my career to support hers because she told me it was best for us? No one wanted to hear that, so I stayed silent. But something changed that night. I saw her clearly, maybe for the first time. This wasn't love. This wasn't a partnership. This was a performance, and I was nothing more than a prop. I left the dinner feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Anger. Not just at Megan, but at myself. For letting it go on this long. For allowing her to turn me into someone I barely recognized. And I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. The silence between us stretched for days after the anniversary dinner. Megan didn't notice. Or if she did, she didn't care. She carried on as if nothing had happened, as if her words hadn't chipped away at me in front of a room full of people. I told myself I should let it go, that this was just another moment in a long line of moments I'd learned to swallow. But something about that night clung to me. It wasn't just the humiliation, though that had been bad enough. It was the way she had looked right through me, like I wasn't even a person, like I was just a part of the background noise in her perfect, polished life. I tried to shake it off, to focus on Emma, on the daily routines that usually kept me grounded. I cooked, cleaned, picked her up from school, helped with homework, and did all the little things that made up my life. But everything felt different. The shift was small at first. I caught myself hesitating before speaking in conversations, second-guessing myself before answering a question. I became hyper-aware of the way Megan reacted to me, how she never quite looked at me when I spoke, how she checked her phone when I was mid-sentence. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was exhausted. The breaking point came at a dinner party with our friends, a gathering Megan had insisted on hosting despite knowing I'd be the one doing all the work. I should have known better than to expect the night to go smoothly. The house was spotless, the food perfect, the wine flowing. Megan was in her element, talking strategy, branding, company mergers, things she never discussed with me. I sat at the end of the table, nursing a drink, nodding along as everyone else carried the conversation. And then, as if she couldn't help herself, she turned the conversation to me. "Jake's been, what's the word? Adjusting," she said, smirking. "The stay-at-home life has been so fulfilling, right, babe?" I looked up from my glass, my jaw tightening. "Yeah, it's been great." She laughed lightly, shaking her head. "Oh, don't be modest. You've really committed to the role. He even has a system now. Color-coded grocery lists, meal plans, laundry schedules. He runs the house like a full-on operation." Laughter. Again, one of our friends, Matt, grinned. "Sounds like you should write a book, man. How to be a trophy husband 101. More laughter. Louder this time. I felt the heat rise to my face. I forced a smile, gripping my glass a little tighter. "Yeah, maybe I will." Megan wasn't done. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "I mean, it's cute, right? Watching him try to be useful." The room spun. Something inside me snapped. I set my glass down carefully, the sound sharper than I intended. The laughter died out as the mood shifted, people sensing the change before I even spoke. I turned to Megan, keeping my voice level. "You know what's funny?" She blinked. "What?" "For someone who loves talking about how I don't have a real job, you sure depend on me to make your life work." I gestured around the house. "Who do you think makes sure everything runs smoothly? Who picks up the slack when your high-powered meetings run late? Who's raising our daughter while you play the role of corporate queen?" Megan's smile faltered, but I wasn't done. "You act like I'm some kind of joke, like I'm just killing time until I get a real job. But here's the thing, Megan. Without me, your entire life falls apart." Silence. I watched her face shift, shock, anger, embarrassment, all flickering in rapid succession. She hadn't expected this. She had spent years tearing me down, but she had never seen me fight back. She let out a short, uncomfortable laugh, reaching for her wine. "Okay, someone's had too much to drink." I shook my head. "No, I've just finally had enough." I stood up, pushing my chair back. The room felt too small, too suffocating. I didn't care about the stunned looks from our friends, about the awkward silence that followed. I needed air. I needed out. Megan reached for me, her fingers brushing my wrist. "Jake," I pulled away. "Enjoy your dinner." I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, my pulse pounding. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm inside me. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself, and it felt good. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing. This marriage wasn't what I thought it was, and I was finally ready to face the truth. I didn't go home right away. I drove aimlessly, the streetlights blurring past as I tried to make sense of everything. My pulse was still pounding from the dinner, my body buzzing with the aftershock of finally standing up to Megan. I had spent years swallowing my anger, convincing myself that the problem was me, that I was too sensitive, that I just needed to be more patient, that if I loved her enough, she'd respect me again. But she never would, because respect had never been part of the equation for her. I pulled into an empty parking lot, gripping the steering wheel as the realization sank in. My marriage wasn't broken. It had never been whole in the first place. By the time I made it home, the house was dark. Megan had left the lights on, a habit she had picked up over the years. I closed the door quietly, half expecting her to be waiting for me with crossed arms and an accusation ready. But the house was silent. I climbed the stairs, pausing outside our bedroom door. Light filtered under the crack, but when I pushed it open, she wasn't there. Her suitcase was. For a second, my breath caught. Was she leaving? Had I pushed her too far? Then I saw the airline ticket stub on the dresser. London, right? Her big consulting project. She had mentioned it weeks ago, but I hadn't given it much thought. She traveled often for work, and by now, I was used to the routine. She'd leave, I'd take care of Emma, and she'd come back with a few souvenirs and stories about high-powered meetings that I wasn't smart enough to understand. But something about this trip felt different. I moved toward the suitcase, my fingers trailing over the fabric. It was packed neatly, almost too neatly. Megan wasn't the type to plan ahead. She was the kind of person who threw things together last minute. But this suitcase had been packed with care. I hesitated before unzipping it. I had never gone through Megan's things before. I had never felt the need to. But now, standing there in the dim light, something in my gut told me to look closer. I lifted the top layer of clothes, my fingers brushing against something hard at the bottom, a small velvet box. My chest tightened. I pulled it out and flipped it open. A luxury watch. Not mine. My stomach twisted. It was sleek, expensive, the kind of watch that was meant to be gifted with meaning. And then I saw the engraving on the inside. For the moments we steal. My fingers clenched around the box. I felt the air in the room change, the walls closing in around me. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. That it was a client gift. That it was something she had picked up for a business partner. But deep down, I already knew the truth. This wasn't just a watch. This was proof. Proof that Megan wasn't just emotionally distant. She wasn't just cruel. She was cheating. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the watch as my mind raced. I thought back to the way she had been acting recently. Her distraction, her irritability, the way she barely looked at me anymore. The way she always had an excuse. My husband doesn't suspect a thing. The words weren't spoken, but I could hear them anyway. I exhaled sharply, shoving the watch back into the suitcase, my hands trembling. The anger that had been simmering inside me for years finally boiled over. How long had this been going on? How many nights had I spent at home, taking care of Emma, while she was in some hotel room whispering to another man? How many times had she laughed at me behind my back, knowing she had already replaced me? I wanted to storm downstairs, to wake her up and demand answers. But I didn't. Not yet. Megan was good at twisting things and making me feel like the crazy one. If I confronted her now, she'd find a way to make herself the victim. She'd spin the narrative, turn my anger into proof that I was unstable, that I was the problem. I wouldn't give her that chance. I needed more than a watch. I needed undeniable proof. I stood up, my mind clearing for the first time in weeks. I was done being the passive husband who let her walk all over me. Megan had spent years making me feel small, making me feel like I wasn't good enough. She was about to find out exactly how wrong she was. I barely slept that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with every possible scenario. Megan had made me feel like I was the problem for so long that even now, a small part of me wanted to doubt what I'd seen. But there was no mistaking it. The watch, the engraving, the careful way she had packed it away like a secret she never meant for me to find. By morning, my anger had settled into something sharper. A plan. Megan left early, rushing through breakfast with barely a word to me. I watched her sip her coffee, scrolling through emails like nothing had changed. Like she wasn't living a double life right in front of me. I studied her, looking for any sign of guilt, any hesitation in the way she carried herself. But there was nothing. "I'll be home late," she said, grabbing her bag. "Final prep for London." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Got it." She kissed Emma on the forehead, muttered a distracted goodbye, and walked out the door. I waited until I heard her car pull away before I moved. I had 48 hours before she flew out. That was enough time. The first thing I did was replace the watch. I found a cheap replica online. Same style, same brand, just a worthless knockoff. I drove across town to pick it up, making sure to pay in cash, and spent the afternoon carefully swapping them out. When Megan opened that velvet box in London, she wouldn't find a symbol of stolen moments. She'd find a useless piece of metal. Next, I needed more than just a watch. Megan was careful. She had spent years perfecting the art of deception. If I wanted proof, I had to be smarter. I started by checking her call logs. Her phone was always locked, but I didn't need to get in. Our phone plan was shared, and I had access to the billing records. I scrolled through her call history, my stomach tightening with each unfamiliar number. One in particular stood out: repeated calls at odd hours, always the same London-based number. I searched it. The name came up immediately. Daniel Carter. I clenched my jaw. He wasn't just some random fling. He was a senior partner at the firm she was consulting for. A high-powered executive with an impeccable reputation, a man who had been mentioned in business magazines. So this was who she had chosen. Someone who fit her world, someone she could admire. I forced myself to breathe. Knowing his name wasn't enough. I needed more. That night, after Emma was asleep, I logged onto Megan's laptop. She had never been careful with passwords, assuming I'd never have a reason to look. A few educated guesses, and I was in. Her email was filled with work correspondence, but buried between the spreadsheets and schedules were messages that told me everything I needed to know. Underscore can't wait to see you again. Underscore counting down the days until we're together. This month will be perfect. And then the one that sealed it. My husband doesn't suspect a thing. He thinks I'm working 12-hour days. This is our little secret. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. She hadn't just lied. She had made a fool of me. My hands didn't shake as I copied the emails. My heart didn't race as I recorded everything. Screenshots, forwarded messages, timestamps. I saved them in a secure folder, then backed them up to a private drive. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. For years, I had let Megan dictate the rules of our marriage. I had let her erode my confidence, let her convince me that I was less than her, that I was lucky to be with someone so successful. But now I held all the cards. The last step of my plan required patience. I wasn't going to confront her yet. That would give her time to spin a new lie, to manipulate the truth. No, I needed her to walk straight into the trap. She had always underestimated me. Now, she was about to learn exactly what I was capable of. Megan's flight to London was scheduled for the next afternoon. She spent the morning double-checking her bags, answering last-minute emails, and making sure Emma wouldn't miss her too much while she was gone. To her, it was just another business trip, another month of long hours and working late. She had no idea that I already knew everything. I watched her move around the house with practiced efficiency, slipping into the role of the devoted working mother just long enough to keep up appearances. She kissed Emma's forehead, promising to bring back souvenirs, then turned to me. "I'll text when I land," she said casually. "But the first week is going to be packed, so don't expect too many calls." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Of course." She gave me a quick, dismissive smile, grabbed her suitcase, and walked out the door. I didn't follow her to the airport. I already knew exactly where she was going, who was picking her up, and where she'd be staying. The moment she was gone, I opened my laptop and pulled up the security software I had installed 2 nights ago. Her laptop was still active. I had placed a remote access program on it, allowing me to track her location, access her files, and even listen through the microphone. It was a risk, but Megan had never been cautious. She assumed I was too naive, too trusting to ever look beyond the surface. Less than an hour after her plane landed, I watched as her laptop's location shifted from Heathrow Airport to a penthouse suite in London. Not her hotel, Daniel Carter's residence. I clenched my jaw, but forced myself to stay focused. I activated the microphone. At first, all I heard was muffled movement. Doors closing, footsteps, the rustle of fabric. Then voices. Megan's. And his. "You're finally here." Daniel's voice was smooth, confident. The voice of a man who had never once considered consequences. Megan laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in months. "Told you I'd make it." Did he suspect anything? A pause. Then Megan spoke again, her voice lower, amused. "Not a thing. He still thinks I'm drowning in meetings. As far as he knows, I'm exhausted and overworked." Daniel chuckled. "He must be clueless." Megan sighed, and I heard the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "Jake doesn't ask questions. He just accepts whatever I tell him." I closed my eyes for a second, steadying my breathing. Then I saved the recording. It wasn't just the proof I needed. It was her own words, spoken freely, without hesitation. She had lied to me for months, had built an entire second life while making me feel like I wasn't enough. Now she was about to find out exactly what that cost. I spent the next 2 hours carefully executing the next phase of my plan. I logged into her Instagram, the password still unchanged, and scheduled a post. A video reel titled London Memories. The first few images were innocent enough. Megan at the airport, Megan in London, things she might have posted herself. But then came the recording. Her voice, crystal clear. "Not a thing. He still thinks I'm drowning in meetings. As far as he knows, I'm exhausted and overworked." Followed by photos she had sent to Daniel, but never shared publicly. Intimate dinners, rooftop views, a private moment caught in the reflection of a hotel window. I set the post to go live at exactly 6 a.m. London time. The moment she woke up, the world would already know. Then I logged into our joint bank account and transferred everything that was mine into a separate account. Megan had always assumed I was too passive to protect myself. That was her mistake. By the time I finished, my hands were steady, my heart calm. Megan had spent years making me feel invisible. By morning, she'd know exactly what it felt like to have the ground ripped out from under her. Megan woke up to chaos. I knew the moment she saw the Instagram post because her laptop's microphone picked up the sharp inhale, the rustling of sheets, and the frantic tapping of her fingers against the screen. What the? Her voice was breathless, panicked. Then came the notifications, her phone vibrating over and over, the pings of incoming messages from friends, family, and colleagues. I imagined the way her stomach must have dropped as she scrolled through the comments, each one slicing away at the perfect image she had built. Megan, is this real? Tell me this is a joke. Your husband posted this? Oh my God, so much for power couple goals. A muffled voice, Daniel's, cut through the noise. Megan, what's wrong? More rustling. Sheets being thrown back, hurried footsteps. My husband hacked my Instagram, she hissed. He posted. Her voice broke off. I leaned back in my chair, listening. Daniel sighed. What did he post? A pause. Then, her voice, tight with anger. Everything. I imagined her scrolling through the reel, seeing her own words broadcasted for the world to hear. Not a thing. He still thinks I'm drowning in meetings. The betrayal, the arrogance, the proof laid bare for everyone, her family, her co-workers, even her boss, to see. She must have been scrambling to delete it, but I had changed the account settings. She no longer had control. Then, another realization must have hit her because I heard her laptop slam shut and her voice turn sharp. I need to call Jake. I was already waiting. My phone buzzed, her name flashing across the screen. I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my voice steady. Megan, you. Her breath was uneven. You hacked my account. You posted that video. Are you out of your mind? I exhaled, pretending to think. I was going to keep it private. But then I realized, why should I protect you when you never once protected me? She sucked in a sharp breath. Jake, take it down. Now. I almost laughed at the desperation in her voice. No. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Her voice dropped, cold and commanding. You're making a huge mistake. I leaned back in my chair. No, Megan. My mistake was trusting you. My mistake was letting you make me feel small for years while you did whatever you wanted. This is just me setting things right. You ruined me, she spat. My career, my reputation. I cut her off. You ruined yourself. Another silence. Then a different tactic. Her voice softened, trying to sound hurt. Jake, please. We have a life together. A daughter. Let's talk about this before it goes too far. It was almost impressive how fast she could switch between anger and manipulation. But I wasn't falling for it this time. It already went too far, I said. You just never thought you'd get caught. She exhaled sharply, but I wasn't done. By the way, don't bother checking our bank account. I already moved what's mine. Consider it compensation for wasting years of my life. You. Her voice broke, real panic setting in. You move the money? I smiled. You didn't think I'd let you walk away with everything, did you? A sound of frustration, something hitting the wall, maybe her phone. Then her voice, seething. I'll fight this, Jake. You have no idea what you started. I let out a slow breath. Then fight. But remember, you're the one who got caught. And now, everyone knows who you really are. I hung up before she could respond. The house was quiet. Emma was still asleep, oblivious to the storm unraveling in another country. I stood there for a moment, my phone still in my hand, waiting to feel something, guilt, regret, maybe even sadness. But I felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. I felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't second-guessing myself, wasn't wondering what I could do differently to make Megan happy. I wasn't clinging to a marriage that had died long ago. She had always been so sure of herself, so convinced that I would never push back. Now, she had to live with the consequences. I put my phone down and walked outside, taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. Megan's life was unraveling, and I was finally stepping into my own. Megan didn't call again. She must have realized by now that pleading, threatening, or manipulating me wouldn't work. But that didn't mean she wasn't preparing for war. I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. She had spent years crafting the perfect image, and she wouldn't let me be the one to tear it down completely. So I stayed ahead of her. While she scrambled to salvage her reputation in London, I met with my lawyer. Vanessa Reynolds was sharp, direct, and not easily intimidated. She flipped through the documents I had brought, screenshots of emails, bank records, proof of the affair, and nodded approvingly. "You did your homework," she said, barely glancing up. "I had to," I replied. "Megan's going to come after me for everything." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against the desk. "She's going to play victim. Claim you're vengeful, controlling. She'll twist everything to make herself look like the one who's been wronged. But the evidence is airtight. The affair, the financial manipulation, the way she's tried to humiliate you. Judges don't take kindly to that." I exhaled, gripping the edge of the chair. "I don't want revenge," I said, and it was true. That part was over. I had exposed her. She was already paying the price. I just want to protect what's mine. I want primary custody of Emma. I want to make sure Megan can't ruin me financially. And I want to walk away from this knowing I never have to answer to her again. Vanessa studied me for a long moment. "We can make that happen, but it won't be easy. She's going to fight tooth and nail to keep control." I nodded. "Let her try." The first legal battle began the moment Megan returned from London. She walked in the house 3 days later, looking worn but still holding onto that icy, composed mask she always wore when she wanted to appear unaffected. She set her bags down and folded her arms, staring at me like I was a puzzle she had yet to solve. "I spoke to a lawyer," she said. I didn't even blink. "So did I." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not going to let you take everything from me, Jake." I laughed, shaking my head. "Everything?" I took back what was mine. "You're the one who threw everything away." She inhaled sharply. "I made a mistake. That doesn't mean I should lose my daughter or my career or my life." I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm. "No, Megan, you didn't make a mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, saying something in anger you don't mean. What you did was calculated. You lied, manipulated, and betrayed me for months. You made a choice over and over again." She swallowed hard but didn't look away. "And now you want to punish me for it?" I shook my head. "No, I just don't want you controlling my life anymore." She exhaled, her gaze hardening. "If you try to take Emma from me, I will fight you with everything I have." I met her stare. I expected nothing less. The divorce papers were filed 2 days later. Megan's legal team wasted no time. She tried to paint me as unstable, bitter, too emotional to be a reliable parent. She claimed I had violated her privacy, that my actions had been reckless and damaging. She even tried to suggest that exposing her affair was emotionally harmful to Emma, an attempt to turn my own daughter into a legal weapon. But Vanessa was relentless. During one of the legal meetings, she laid out every piece of evidence in front of Megan's attorney with surgical precision. "Your client is the one who committed fraud, engaged in an extramarital affair, and openly admitted to deceiving her husband," she said coolly, tapping the transcript of Megan's own words. "Any attempt to paint Jake as unstable is not only laughable, but completely unsupported by the facts." Megan sat stiffly beside her lawyer, her nails digging in her palm as she realized she was losing control. Her attorney cleared his throat. "We're willing to negotiate custody terms, but our client is requesting joint decision-making." I didn't hesitate. "I want primary custody." Megan turned to me sharply. "That's not happening." Vanessa didn't even look up. "It is. You admitted in writing that Jake is the primary caregiver. Your travel schedule, your professional commitments, everything supports that Emma's routine and stability are built around him. Courts prioritize that." Megan's fingers twitched. "I won't let him take my daughter from me." "You'll still have visitation," Vanessa said smoothly. "But Jake will be the custodial parent. Unless you'd rather this go to trial, where we can present every email, recording, and transaction that proves you were too busy lying to your husband to prioritize your child." Megan's face went pale. For the first time, I saw something I had never seen in her before. Fear. She had spent so long controlling every aspect of her life, crafting the perfect narrative. But now the cracks were too deep. The world saw her for what she was. The court would too. Her lawyer leaned in, speaking quietly to her. Megan clenched her jaw, staring at the table, the muscles in her face twitching as she struggled to contain the fury beneath the surface. Then, finally, she exhaled and nodded. The papers were signed. I had won. When the meeting ended, Megan lingered, staring at the documents in front of her as if she could change their meaning just by willing it. I stood, grabbing my jacket. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "You really did this," she murmured. I met her gaze, steady and unshaken. "I did." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "I underestimated you." I slipped my hands into my pockets. "That was your first mistake." Without another word, I turned and walked out. Megan had spent years trying to make me feel like I was nothing. The day the divorce was finalized, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. No more legal meetings, no more tension hanging over my head like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Megan had signed the papers, agreeing to the terms that Vanessa had fought for: primary custody of Emma, a clean financial separation, and a quiet, uncontested divorce. She had no choice. The evidence had been stacked against her, and she knew dragging this out would only destroy whatever reputation she had left. I took a deep breath as I sat in my new apartment, a modest two-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. No more walking on eggshells, no more feeling like a guest in my own home. Just peace. Emma adjusted quickly, faster than I had expected. At first, she had questions: why Mom wasn't staying with us, why we were living in a different place, but I made sure she knew that nothing about our love for her had changed. "Are you happy, Daddy?" she asked one evening while we sat on the couch, her small hands wrapped around her favorite stuffed animal. I smiled at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yeah, sweetheart, I really am." And for the first time, I wasn't just saying it to convince myself. Megan, on the other hand, wasn't doing so well. I heard through mutual friends that her company had put her on an extended leave, the fallout from the Instagram scandal still lingering. Clients had pulled back, investors were hesitant, and her credibility was hanging by a thread. I wasn't surprised. In her world, image was everything, and she had built hers on the illusion of being untouchable. That illusion had shattered the moment her double life was exposed. She tried to regain control. She posted carefully curated statements, pretending to be the victim of an unfortunate breach of privacy. She hinted at deep personal struggles and a difficult time of growth. But the damage was done. People might have been willing to overlook a private affair, but they couldn't ignore the smug way she had spoken about deceiving me, the way she had treated our marriage as an inconvenience. Her inner circle started to shrink. Some people supported her out of obligation, but many distanced themselves. She had built her life on control, and now she had none. She called me a few times, but I never answered. I didn't need to hear whatever new version of the truth she had crafted. I had spent too many years listening to her rewrite reality. I focused on myself instead. I went back to work, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I had put my software engineering career on hold for years, believing Megan's job was more important, that my role was to support her success. But now, I was free to build something for myself. I reached out to old contacts, took on new projects, and slowly, I rebuilt the professional life I had abandoned. And it felt good. I also reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with because Megan had subtly pushed them out of my life. I hadn't realized how isolated I had become, how much I had let her dictate who I spent time with, how I spent my days. Now, I was choosing for myself. One afternoon, while I was at a coffee shop working on a project, an old friend, David, slid into the seat across from me. "Man, I almost didn't recognize you," he said, shaking his head. "You look different." I raised an eyebrow. "Good different?" He smirked. "Yeah, like you finally got out of prison." I laughed, shaking my head. "It kind of feels that way." David leaned back, studying me for a moment. "She really did number on you, huh?" I exhaled, tapping my fingers against a coffee cup. "Yeah, but that's over now." He nodded. "Good. Because the guy I knew before Megan, he was sharp, funny, had ambition. I think you let her convince you that you weren't good enough." I looked down for a second, considering his words. I did, but not anymore. I met his gaze and smiled. Not anymore. Megan had taken a lot from me. Years of my life, my confidence, my sense of self. But she hadn't destroyed me. I had walked away, rebuilt, and now I was stronger than ever. A few weeks later, I got a text from her. Megan, we need to talk. I stared at the message for a long time. In the past, I would have felt obligated to respond, to smooth things over, to make her feel better about the choices she had made. But not anymore. I deleted the message and went back to living my life. For the first time in a long time, I was truly free. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.